Гер тобі хамола ласточки а голдене, возі зінг той на грінем вал. Ой, кімці мір, манзі сер соловейчику, her noran, wo sich jeder suchen bald. Oi fin der Watens, ob ich der Erde am Bänke nicht. Oi in dein Lied, was ich hab teike vergiderken. Dann schön singen, dit mehr stark der Barmen. Ab und ab dich, schön sehr landerken.
Welcome, Michael Alpert, to summer concerts in the White Stork Synagogue. It is supposed to be live, but because of the world situation now, we are doing this digitally, and it's a great pleasure for me and for our audience to be listening to you, telling your story and sharing it with us. Welcome. Shalom Aleichem.
Aleichem shalom dir, aleichem shalom alamin. It's wonderful to be back in the White Stork Synagogue, especially being in the White Stork Synagogue and being in my garden in Scotland.
Exactly.
And we are live. I mean, you know, Kinahara, you're live. I'm live. I'm in a beautiful garden with birds and flowers.
Exactly, because you're not in the United States, you're in Scotland, you're in Europe.
Yes, I've lived in Scotland for the last 7 years, actually.
Oh,
and
because, you know, whenever you read about you, it's all about America, but you've been very linked to Europe also in your later career and your work and everything. So for us, it's very interesting because there are not so many authentic Yiddish singers around, and our audience, oh, thank you, Jacob. Okay.
Yeah. What's happening?
He had a phone that he didn't turn off. Okay, so we continue. So it's a great pleasure for us to hear your story, your authentic story about being a Yiddish singer, a klezmer, promoting this Jewish culture that in Europe.
Yes, it's funny how, pardon me, 1 second. It's always interesting to me that people are surprised that I spoke Yiddish in Los Angeles, or even, you know, people often have asked me, are there Jews in Los Angeles? And Los Angeles is actually pretty much the third largest Jewish community in the world. It wasn't as big when I was growing up, but it was big. You know, it is a major world city and a major US city. Yes, and it's interesting because my father came from Europe, from Lithuania, essentially from, we could also say from Poland, because he and my whole family came from Wileńszczyzna, but actually the part of it, this was before the First World War, just before the First World War. He came to the US in 1912, and they came first to New England, to Boston. And then my father went on after the Second World War to Los Angeles. My mother was actually born in Boston, but her parents had just come to the U.S. From the Bukovina region and from East Galicia, Galicia Wschodnia. And my mother had gone to Los Angeles as a child in 1919, which was very early to go out west. So interestingly, I was born in this very far place on a beautiful coast with beautiful mountains around it and flowers and palm trees and unfortunately at that time lots of smog too. I also learned English at home, but my parents, especially with my father's family being Lithuanian Jews, and the same is true with my mother's family being Austro-Hungarian Jews, there was this interesting situation of what linguists call heteroglossia. In other words, speaking many languages at the same time. And so Yiddish was certainly native to me. Also Russian and Polish to a certain extent. Some Ukrainian, some German because of my mother's mother, my grandmother, who was from Chernovitz, actually. And this amazing mixture has a great deal to do with everything I've become and done in my life.
It's very interesting because you live in Los Angeles. For Europeans, Los Angeles, it's like, Hollywood and all that. And then you're talking about all these languages that you grew up with. And I know also from having learned also that Ladino also were very active in Los Angeles. So actually, as a Jewish center, you were on many crossroads there in Los Angeles.
Absolutely. No, Los Angeles is a world city. And it's, speaking of Hollywood, I was actually born right underneath the famous Hollywood sign. Literally, the hospital I was born in is right down the hill. And my parents lived up in the hills there when I was born, in a little apartment that was right underneath this big famous Hollywood sign. So people often ask me astrologically what sign I was born under. I say the Hollywood sign. So but one important thing I was going to say is that what's also so important to who I am and what I've done in life, the fact that not only were my parents considerably older, but my grandparents were even much older still. My father's parents I never met, even though they came to the United States. If you can believe it, my grandparents on my father's side were born in 1864 and 1868. So there are these huge bridges of time and experience and culture that somehow have connected.
So your parents must have been very old when you were born.
Yes, my dad was 47 and my mother was 45, and ich bin a ben yochid. I'm an only child still.
Oh, really? That is beautiful. So you and then you traveled into the world, like you came to New York, because I have a surprise for you. I also have lived several places in my life, and there are certain things that follow me. It's my recordings and my books. And look what I found this morning.
Yep. That was the beginning of the New York period.
So when did you come to New York?
I came to New York in 1979. And it was never my dream to go to New York. I thought I was basically headed for going back to the land and living out in the forest in Northern California or up in Vermont. But I had actually spent an important part of my growing up years, my teenage years, in Boston. I had moved when I was 12. I moved back to Boston, so I'm a classic bi-coastal in that sense. I grew up, my primal memories are and my childhood was the West Coast and California, Southern California. My teenage years were in New England, which was where most of my family was, and my real strongly Yiddish-speaking family and traditional Jewish, ranging from frum to traditional. And so that was an important thing too. Then I went back to California for 5 years, and I went to UCLA in the basically 1974 to about 1979. But in 1979, I came to New York. Never, as I said, never having dreamed of going to New York, but I had both. I had a partner in New York, and then I had an offer of a job playing Jewish music in New York City, and it was really the beginnings. We had started what was to grow into the whole klezmer revitalization and the Yiddish Renaissance and so forth. In the late 1970s, in LA, actually, before Capella, we had another band called the Chutzpah Yiddish Orchestra in Los Angeles. And but then in 1979, I moved to New York, and the whole kind of modern period of my life, more adult part of my life, began.
Because even in New York, I mean, Yiddish and the Yiddish theater was kind of down at that period. It was not, you know. So I know this whole revival, it was also some in Germany, but, you know, it started in the States, maybe before in the States or simultaneously. But it was not very obvious for anybody to sing Yiddish songs or deal with Yiddish culture. Because I don't know with the American Jews, but they were probably also more focused on singing new Hebrew songs or old Hebrew songs than singing Yiddish traditional songs.
Yes, I mean that's on the one hand that's true. Even in New York, and you know, it used to be when we first started, when we formed Capella, and we were performing in and around New York, but not only New York. We began traveling and touring, not necessarily nationwide so early, but the thing was that in those days, when you did anything, that if you had the word Yiddish attached to something, it was mainly 60, 70, 80-year-old people who would show up. It's not that there was no Yiddish. Of course, in the New York, just in the New York area, there were possibly millions of people that spoke Yiddish, or at least knew Yiddish. And, but absolutely, Yiddish culture didn't have the, you know, the popular or and certainly, you know, international focus and consciousness that it has today.
It was through the music. I mean, that the music started to be interesting for young people. That was something new, and not to necessarily Orthodox Jews, but for a larger audience.
Yeah, specifically for, you know, not for Orthodox Jews. I mean, Orthodox Jews already, you know, had a great deal of culture left, especially the Hasidic world, which in the Hasidic world of 1979, 80 was, of course, even then was kind of different than the Hasidic world of today. But yes, and, you know, a number of us have really described this Yiddish and klezmer, Yiddish music revitalization, Yiddish cultural revitalization as a countercultural phenomenon. It was, you know, for most of us younger musicians who were involved in it, this was going back to our grandparents' generation. In the case of a few of us, myself, Henry Sapoznik, Josh Woletsky, and so forth, it was our parents' generation. It was our, you know, our parents were in a few cases immigrants, and we had a different connection, of course, to Yiddish language, and therefore the songs and the song tradition than many people, even at the time, who were involved in it, and of course differently than many younger people today.
In the beginning in the States, did a lot of people come to the concerts? Was it difficult to arrange concerts?
No, not at all. See, that was the thing, is that just looking at Capella, for example, me, Henry Sapoznik, Lauren Brody, who was also part of Capella, we were involved in different kinds of traditional music, of ethnic music, of folk music, American folk music. I had lived in Yugoslavia for a couple of years as a late teenager, so I was very involved in the music of the Balkans, and I had grown up with, as I said, some with Russian and Ukrainian and Polish, and a lot of that music was very, very familiar to us. But so the interesting thing is, you know, we were used to making no money playing music. You'd play a folk club or something like that, and maybe make $35. The first concert that Capella did, which was in Providence, Rhode Island, in a synagogue, suddenly we made $200 a piece. And, you know, all of a sudden it was, you know, these were concerts where people were sitting and listening and tuned into, and, you know, it was a brand new phenomenon, but one that was increasingly better and better received. And within a year or two, we were playing events like the Philadelphia Folk Festival and large venues for, you know, where you saw that klezmer music and Yiddish music, which I preferred to call it at the time and still do, was being accepted as a part of the rainbow of folk musics and traditional musics in the, this diverse American context.
It's interesting because at the same time the music became popular, the Yiddish theater wasn't really having any real future. It became very marginalized. While the Yiddish music and the songs, they could kind of carry on, and even for people who not necessarily understood the songs. By the way, it's interesting for me because you are a Yiddish singer, and you sing in Yiddish, and usually your audience, they don't understand what you're singing about, and the Yiddish words are so extremely important. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, within this world, the world of the Yiddish cultural world, I mean, what we now speak of as Yiddishland, the comprehension of Yiddish, I mean, all kinds of younger people are, have learned Yiddish, are learning Yiddish at various stages. People who, were not just interested in the language per se or the songs, even people who are, very fine klezmer musicians, but have realized over the years that, in order to really be part of this culture, they need to know Yiddish. And an old close friend and kind of mentor of mine, Ben Berek Basiler, who was a klezmer musician from Warsaw, he said years ago to some of my colleagues in early Brave Old World, he said, klezmer darfst du reden Yiddish. If you want to be a klezmer, you have to speak Yiddish. So that's really taken off. The other interesting part of that phenomenon, and actually of this whole phenomenon, was the development of the interest in Yiddish music and Yiddish culture in Germany. And I first went there. We went with Capella in 1984. We did our first tour of Europe, and we were the first American neo-klezmer band to go and tour in Europe, the summer of 1984. And the remarkable thing about Germany, not so surprising, was that all of a sudden our audiences, who were almost completely non-Jewish, suddenly understood 80% of what we were saying when we spoke Yiddish. I made a point of speaking Yiddish from the stage and tweaking it a little bit to when I knew people didn't understand the Hebrew words or the Slavic words. And but far more than most audiences in America, especially younger audiences, there was this language and communication avenue that was open there, in addition to all of the historical and social factors that made Yiddish fascinating to people and the Yiddish world and
yes,
all of
and
that.
it was, I mean, people were hungry for this culture. You felt
Absolutely.
that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And if I can skip to performing in Poland for the first time, which was 1991. Not the first time I'd been in Poland. I'd been in Poland in 1974 when I was 20 years old. And that's a whole other little interesting chapter. But one big difference playing in Poland, we performed basically at one of the very early Jewish culture festivals in Krakow in June of 1991. And the thing in Poland was that even if people didn't understand the language, they understood the music. The music was natural in a certain way. And what was clear when we were playing on the stage there in the street in Krakow, and there were a few hundred people, not the thousands of people, but a large crowd. The way I always used to describe it is people, when they heard this music, they knew how to dance in a circle. They got into a circle and they danced, and not wildly, but in those years in Poland, I think, and I began teaching Yiddish dance there in 1994. So many people were familiar with with, I think, traditional East European music, traditional Polish music, traditional Polish dancing. Lots of people had been in dance groups, which of course were encouraged in the years of communist Poland, and they knew how to dance to this stuff in one way or another. They knew something very similar, or we were really kind of, in that sense, we were finally home again.
And in a way, through the music, because you're talking about Germany, they understand more the Yiddish, but in Poland, it's almost like the music, the sounds is a kind of a relief for emotions that are kept inside, because because also the history with communism and everything was just completely was not allowed, or was not really dealt with for so many years, the history of the Jews in Poland. So with you
Yes,
coming and playing this very joyful song music, and also or dancing, it's kind of was an outlet of emotions, and
absolutely, yeah. But again, even in spite of government policy, the social and cultural sense of both the Jewish heritage and our common heritage was so strong. I mean, and not only on an intellectual level, but just like I said, people got it. People understood it. The cultural understanding was so much deeper. And of course, we were in the place where we, in broad terms, came from culturally, literally. Henry's parents were from Poland. My father was from, and my whole family was from a corner of Poland.
So tell me, so from 91, you started to perform in the festival in Krakow, and you've also been very involved in the programming and coming every year for that festival. How and you probably still are. And how has it affected you and your musicians from the United States coming here to Europe? Can you tell me a little bit about it?
Okay, well, of course, let's remember that we started coming to Europe, and then not only Capella, but then Brave Old World and the Klezmatics. But now many people.
I mean, you played in many different bands. I mean, Brave Old World, which is so famous, and also this Itzhak Perlman CD that became so important because it was also bringing the music to many people who never would have been confronted with Yiddish, and klezmer, having Itzhak Perlman playing. And I know you were the producer there and had a big hand of that recording. So I'm not forgetting that. I just think that for us also, it's very interesting how you felt it was so important to be involved here in Poland, and this revival of the Yiddish and the klezmer in Poland.
Yeah, well, I guess that's the that's the important thing, is that well, first I was going to say it's no longer a new phenomenon that we've been coming from the US or from other parts of Western Europe, but especially from North America, musicians coming to perform and teach Yiddish music and other traditions in Poland or in Europe in general. That's been going on for 30 years now, or actually 35. But the importance of Poland, and I guess this is where I come in, or where it connects with me personally, is that out of the entire scene, I was pretty much the only person who was, at least it was active in klezmer bands, who spoke Polish, was connected to Poland in that way, even though there were other people, a couple, as I mentioned, Henry Sapoznik, whose parents had grown up in interwar Poland, but I was the one that spoke Polish, had been involved with lots of different non-Jewish East European musics, and it just was a natural fit for me. And then my personal friendship with Janusz Makuch, and at the beginning Krzysztof Gierat, who were directing the Jewish Culture Festival in Krakow, and it was in many ways a kind of coming home, or getting to visit an old home that and of course our relationship with Poland is more complex than that. It wasn't just kind of sweetness and light and, oh, I'm home, it's so great. I have many homes, 'cause people have often asked me, oh, you don't seem to live much of anywhere, and I'm like, no, I lived 35 years in New York City. I am very rooted. All of the places I come from, I'm Californian, I'm a New Englander, I'm not a New Yorker, even though I lived there all these years. I'm very connected to Europe, especially Eastern Europe. And now I live in a village on the coast of Scotland. And all of these places are my homes, and the whole picture that they create are
Don't feel
my
that it,
home in the world.
yes, and you don't feel that it makes you uprooted, being in so many different places, or does it make just your personality enlarging yourself in a way?
No, it makes me feel more rooted, because I feel like it's like a tree that has roots that go out very, very far. My roots extend to many different places, and they like, just like the network of roots of a tree, they connect all these places.
Absolutely. And Michael, people today, they're so afraid of losing their identity all the time. People talking about losing their identity, but being rooted, but also to link with others. It's always been like that. It's part of our culture. And now you also do things with the Ukrainians. You have also a quite new album with a Ukrainian singer, where you mix.
Yeah, well, actually, again, not so new, because it came out, that album came out in 2015, but that's a project that we've been doing together since 1994. So it's, itself is, over 25 years old at this point. But yeah, that of course is a very dear thing to my heart too, that exploration of common Ukrainian and Ukrainian Jewish identity. Because of course my mother's family was from Western Ukraine, and it's not only about the literal kind of family genetic connection, but again, the cultural sensibilities, the cultural memory, coming both from the Jewish perspective and the Ukrainian perspective, are so strong. I mean, it was as I began really getting to know people in the Ukrainian communities, Ukrainian American, Ukrainian Canadian communities, we're all from the same place. It's like, oh, my parents are from Zhytomyr, my parents are from Zhytomyr also. It's like, and the food, so much of our food is the same, that, the same thing coming to Poland for so many North American Jews. It's like, oh, it's Jewish food, may have a few different things in it, but
absolutely, it's important to get this also for us Europeans, because people love to say the others, what are you doing, the others, and to separate and to make such separations. But it's very difficult to make such separations, and I think being a Jew, you have another perspective, a possibility to open up and to reach out. And I think you do it wonderfully with your music and song. And Yiddish, in a way, is that way. The language is built that way, with so many languages within the language.
Absolutely. It's, man sagt a Welt mit Weltalach,
Yeah.
a world full of little worlds. No, that's so true. I like, rather than, what are you doing? I think both of us prefer to say, what are we doing?
Mhm.
We are in this world together, and in these societies together. And just like similar to the United States, and if I dare say to Israel in some ways, but to so many societies. Societies are most of them are not historically monocultural.
Absolutely. I think the music has, meant a lot. We're talking now about Poland. I mean, it has meant a lot after 1989. We're talking about Free Poland, that meeting with these different cultures, that it has meant a lot to the people here. And they love it. It's always already become an integral part of the cultural scene in Poland, and maybe other countries too. But I can, here I'm sure people are waiting for the concerts in the synagogue. There are many people organizing it, and most of the concerts have Jewish music, and it's always packed, always interested. And I know that if we had a concert with you, it would be packed, and we cannot let in very many people now. So the hope for the summer, and also we can only do with local musicians. It's very different than the possibilities, of course. But this all will change soon, and we will be able to invite you. And you will come with your whoever you want to come with, and I'm sure it's going to be a full house. And it's very nice to talk with you, Michael, and thank you for sharing your story. And B'Shana Haba beWrocławiu.
Amen, Alavai, yes.
Next year in Wrocław, and stay healthy, and good luck with all you're up to. And yes, next year I hope to see you here in Wrocław.
Yes, Amen, Mirz Hashem. And a great pleasure to talk with you too. Thank you for this opportunity to talk, and let us talk more in general.
Yes.
Let us all talk more, but right now, let's you and I talk more too.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Papa, seid gesund.
Sei gesund.
Alle, do widzenia.
Їхер тобі хамол, а ласточки, а голдені, возізік, то і нагрінеме вал. Ой, komm zu mir, mein süßer Salavichiko, her nur rein, wo sie geht, ihr sagen bald. Komm zu mir, mein süßer Salavichiko, her nur rein, wo sie geht, ihr sagen bald. Oi, von der Weiden, so bir der Erde ein Bänken nicht, oi in deine Lied, was ich habe, teke vergidere kennt, dein schön Singen hat mir stark der Barmen. Ab und immer bei dir, schön als sehr lang kennt, oi dein schön Singen, dit mir stark der Barmen. Ab und immer bei dir, schön als sehr lang kennt. Zusammen sind in mir geflogen der Welt Allah. In gerinem Bars, in goldenem Saison, bei dem Saliv in Reuten gelief, in Vergang, Farmasel Baroche, Aspai am Nidon, bei dem Saliv in Reuten gelief, in Vergang, Farmasel Baroche, Aspai am Nidon. Oi, weh, mein Lastitschki, die wisst mir, als a Teiere, also wie du nur selten auf der Welt. Dein Chochme und dein Edelkeit gefällt mir. Ach, wie a Saritschki auf dem grünen Feld, dein Kind, dein Hoch, dabei. Sie dir mein Lastitschki, wollt ich schon gern geflogen. Inger in dem Wald mit dir, ach, ob ihr ruhig gestellt. Ich wollt mit dir, oi, geboit, agel, ich die Balle. In dort mit dir, wollt ich euch gehele in mein Welt. Doch ich bin allein nicht mehr, kein Junge, Salavetschiko. Was ich verlieb, ich ständig auf der Pfarrei. Verlassen kenn ich nicht mein Heim, mein warm Nest allein. Хоть ich wohl schon gern, ich verlogen auf das Nein.